Welcome, ladies and gentlemen, to our very first Disneyland commentary. This is something we're going to be doing exclusively for our Patreon subscribers at the $25 level, but for our very first, we thought we would share it with everybody to give you a little taste of what we will be offering as a reward to our Patreon subscribers. And I'd like to welcome the hostess with the mostest, Ruthie. How are you doing?
I'm good, Chris. How are you?
Good. And for the first time, my very good friend, Brian. How are you, Brian?
I'm doing great, Chris. Thanks for having me.
So we're talking about a 1969 theatrical featurette called The Magic of Disneyland. And this is showing the park from how it appeared just before the Haunted Mansion opened. So Pirates had recently opened, the new Tomorrowland. So this is a really fun time capsule. And of course, this is, you're seeing right now, the construction. So before you get to the tour, they're giving you a little backstory here. There's Sleeping Beauty's castle being erected, as they like to say. And that's from '59. That's the Matterhorn being built. And Captain Hook's ship. And they always like to show this in these little things where they have the workers in fast motion.
That's normal speed, though, I think.
Yeah, right. That's how they built it in 1 year.
That's how they do Galaxy's Edge in 1 year.
Yeah.
Do you remember Brian and Ruthie inside the Opera House? They used to have that TV, and they'd show the building of Disneyland in fast motion.
Yeah, the Steve Martin hosted video in there?
No. This was earlier than that. This was like a 1.5 minute movie that was on a constant rotation, and it showed the fast motion film footage of them building Disneyland on a constant rotation all day. And there was a sign above it that said, Disneyland wasn't built in a day, but it was built in a year and a day. And this is classic.
Do they still drive that bicycle up and down Main Street today? That's pretty neat.
With the Dapper Dans on it?
Dapper Dans on there, yeah.
Well, I don't know if they still do it, but they did it. I've seen it. Like in the 80s and 90s, they were still doing it. Of course, the costumes had changed a little by then. They were those, different colored stripes.
Yeah, right.
So this is, this attraction had just opened 4 years earlier in Disneyland. It had opened 5 years earlier in New York, of course. So this was sort of a big deal in '69 when this documentary came out.
It was playing simultaneously for a little bit, right? At the World's Fair and Disneyland?
That is correct. They actually built two AA figures, and one was a backup if anything went wrong with the first one, but nothing went wrong, so they decided to just use the second one and have both playing. So actually it's funny that this is the very first attraction to be playing at two different Disney attraction, to be playing in two different parks at the same time, predating Walt Disney World. So this is Frontierland. That little entrance area hasn't really changed much. This sure has, though. That's not there anymore.
One attraction I wish I could have experienced.
Nature's Wonderland.
They had all the different shaped cactuses and all the audio animatronic animals and the geysers. And here's something that doesn't exist anymore either. This is where Critter Country is now.
This is one of my dad's favorite attractions.
The Indian Village?
He grew up in the 60s going to Disneyland. Yeah.
So here's the sailing ship Columbia, which had premiered in '58, just a couple years after the park. And there's the original.
I don't think they let the canoes get that close to the Columbia anymore.
Probably not, but I used to get that close. I mean, they were a little loosey-goosey even in the 80s with that stuff. But New Orleans Square was brand spanking new in the late 60s. It had just opened in '66. So this was a big deal. This was the galaxy's edge of its time.
Yeah. Something tells me it didn't have the same amount of lines though.
Well, Pirates was a pretty long line in the early years.
I love the look of this man. He looks up at the lady. He's like, "Hey, how you doing?"
None of us were alive when this film came out.
Oh, this was 6 years before my time.
Yeah. So this was another big deal. This had just opened a year before this was filmed. This was filmed in 68, but it came out in 69. And of course, some of the footage was stock footage they had already filmed for previous episodes of The Wonderful World of Color and whatnot. So not everything was brand new footage, but it was all assembled in 68 and released in 69.
Now they have the complete ride-through, the original ride-through on, I think it's disc 1 or 2 of The Curse of the Black Pearl.
Right, which
I like
is
to pop that in every once in a while. It's
the
really
film
good.
That actually comes from an episode of The Wonderful World of Color called From Pirates of the Caribbean to the World of Tomorrow. And this footage you're looking at right now is actually the same footage used in that episode. They just would reuse the same. They filmed it once. They did an extensive job filming everything, so why refilm it a couple years later, you know?
Right.
They just used the same footage from that special.
Carlos, don't be cheeking.
I could never really see him spitting the water out. He's too far away. I never got that until I saw it on TV.
Well, they put a lot of little extra magic in these. Like, you don't see those.
Yeah, those things, they don't really explode. Yeah, that was done for TV.
Wow, you wouldn't see that.
Yeah.
Yeah, that did not happen in real life. That was a TV exclusive. So here we are in Adventureland, and we're going to get a little update of the Jungle Cruise, which had seen some changes over the years. They had added a lot of additional scenes. You know, Mark Davis was approached by Walt to add some comedy to this attraction. That was his first Disneyland assignment.
Oh, that was his first Disneyland assignment? So he was still... Was that when he transitioned from...
Yeah, from animation
to WED?
To WED was to add scenes to the Jungle Cruise. And then he worked, of course, on Nature's Wonderland just next, right after that.
Okay.
This was all Mark Davis, this scene, the elephant bathing pool. He designed all of these characters. You can see the humor in it, you know.
Yeah.
I know he added the natives up the pole with the rhino.
They're going to show that one in a minute, yeah. One thing I can't ever seem to get my hands on, I can't ever find, is that specific hippo grunting noise. I don't have that sound effect. I only have it with music over it. I don't have it isolated. Here's that scene, Ruthie, you were just talking about. Yeah. It always looks so much different from close up than the way you see it when you're in the boat.
Yeah.
You get a lot more of the detail.
It's Trader Sam, and it's over.
2 of his heads for 1 of yours.
Trader Sam once invited me to a party, but I showed up late, and all I got was the cold shoulder.
So this was another big deal in the late 60s, because this attraction was only a few years old at that point. And of course it had been outshined by other things by this time, but it was still impressive at that time, as were those outfits those 2 little girls are wearing. Those are pretty fashion forward, wouldn't you say? The headband and the matching sweater set. This part used to scare the heck out of me when I was really tiny. The whole, the ending. All this really freaked me out. And Pele outside freaked me out, too. She scared the heck out of me.
The goddess of fire and volcanoes.
Yes. And the fire coming out of her hat.
Oh, the pre-show is one of my favorite things to do.
I love it today, and I love most of it then. It was just that one part of it freaked me out when I was 5 years old.
Yeah.
My boys and I will still race around to each of the tikis, and we try to remember who comes next. Then we laugh when someone gets hit on the head by Tongaroa's plants when they come down. There's always that unsuspecting guest.
Oh, yeah. Well, here's Fantasyland. This is the original. It doesn't look anything like this now.
Nope.
All
That's
the
probably
circus
the part that
tent.
has changed the most since this.
Probably, yeah.
Oh,
Out of everything. I mean, you still have all the same attractions, but the outside of them they all look so different now. And some of them have been moved around, and I mean, you recognize that, but there was no railing on it back then. Alice in Wonderland was rail free.
It was rail free for a long time.
Oh yeah, There's Mr. Toad, and of course the Skyway, which no longer exists.
Yep.
Oh, I still remember riding that through the Matterhorn. It was so cool.
So I remember when they still had the mountain climbers. They haven't done that in a long time, but I remember they used to do that every day in the summer. I worked there in 1990 in the summer, and that was going on every day, so I don't know exactly when they stopped doing it, but it was not that long ago, really.
They had them there recently.
Once in a while for a special event. Yeah, they refurbished it in 2011, I think, and they had a whole thing where they kind of did it for a few weeks, and then it's only for very special occasions. It's not like a daily thing anymore. You know, this footage looks so funny to me because it doesn't look fast at all until you see... There's one point where you can see the bobsled. Now it looks fast, but when you're on the track, it looks like, oh, that looks like a nice, peaceful little ride.
Right. Oh, look, it's only one car, too.
Yeah, they changed that in 78. So this was a brand new thing, too. Small World was only there for 3 years at this point. So this was a big deal. And they're actually going to use the Walt Disney narration for this.
Oh, I love that narration.
You can hear him, describing everything. So they recorded that for the episode of The Wonderful World of Color called Disneyland Goes to the World's Fair. And they kept reusing it over and over, the Walt Disney narration. They used it in the Disneyland Around the Seasons episode. And they're using it here also. Yeah. So it was a recycled track. Of course, you have to remember that Walt Disney had only died 2 years earlier when this came out. So he was very much still fresh in everybody's mind at that point. And they used a lot of his recordings in this featurette. You can hear his voice throughout. You know, things he had recorded in earlier years.
Mm-hmm. I like just watching this. This is my favorite ride, so...
Yeah, it's
now,
neat to see without
I think they took out the laughing song here where they go, ha 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 ha. I don't remember that ever being in the Disneyland. It might have been in the World's Fair version, but I don't ever remember that.
Yeah.
I don't think there are dolls next to the laughing hyena anymore.
Yeah,
oh, really?
I don't think there are either.
So right now they're going to sort of get into the weeds on the new Tomorrowland, which had just premiered the year before this was produced. This really was the Galaxy's Edge of that time. Yep. You'll notice the People Movers. You'll notice the People Movers have no railings on them. The first couple months, they didn't have any railings, and some idiot got out of it.
The jail bars that went around.
Yeah, those weren't there. So some idiot climbed out of it and got seriously injured, and they had to immediately close it down and add all those cages. So they ruined it for everybody.
The lady that got in with Mickey Mouse was one of the ambassador.
Yeah, she was an ambassador, right. Most of this footage is from that same episode of The Wonderful World of Color, from Pirates of the Caribbean to The World of Tomorrow.
That's right.
They just kind of recut it and reshuffled it a little bit. In fact, this narrator is, I don't know the narrator's name, but he's the same narrator that narrated that episode on the TV show.
Okay.
So that's where you
okay.
probably recognize his voice from that. So this was fresh from the fair, too.
Yep.
And you'll notice
Be there much longer after this either.
you'll notice that it's turning the opposite direction that America Sings turned. America
Really?
Sings went the other direction from scene to scene, yeah.
Yeah, my first trip to Disneyland, America Sings was there. I love that show.
Yeah.
That's one of your favorites, right, Chris?
Right, we just re-released it on our on the network Roarbots as a best of episode. We did a whole episode of America Sings last 4th of July.
If you haven't seen or heard that podcast, Chris and Ruthie doing America Sings, right after this is over, go back and listen to it because you guys give an outstanding review of all the music. It's just amazing.
It's 3 hours. It's a 3-hour tour, a 3-hour tour. So this had just been updated. It was an opening year attraction, Flight to the Moon, and it had just gotten a huge update. They added the whole audio animatronic flight crew as the pre-show. But a lot of the film footage you're looking at was the actual stuff from the 50s attraction. And most of it was animation, and they just animated it so realistically. Like, that's all animation that the Disney artists did, and they made it look so real that it looked like it was photography. I mean, nobody had been to the moon yet. How could you film it?
Wow.
Here's another favorite extinct
space.
attraction.
That's right, Adventures Through Inner Space.
We
Yep.
did a whole episode on the Tomorrowland 67 too. So we
Yeah,
talked about
we
all
did.
of these attractions.
Right.
Yeah, I rode that when I was a little guy.
Yep.
Oh, me
Remember
too.
going on that.
So this is something I really miss about Disneyland now is that whole kinetic energy in Tomorrowland where you had the People Mover, the monorail, the Autopia, the motorboat cruise, the Skyway, just layers upon the submarines,
Yep.
layers upon layers of movement, the bobsleds from the Matterhorn. It was just movement everywhere. And there's still some of it, but you're missing the People Mover and the motorboats and the Skyway. They've taken away several of the layers.
Yeah. And you had the rocket jets there up on top of the People Mover platform.
Right,
too.
that's been moved too. And you used to be able to see that from the whole land, but now you can only see it from the entrance of the land. Now this, we're going to take a little train ride and get a little preview of something else that had just recently opened. The Primeval World. They skipped the Grand Canyon and take you straight to the Primeval World on this.
Now, all of these displays were from the Ford's Magic Skyway?
Yes, the dinosaurs themselves were all from that, but the scenery had to be rebuilt to fit the new housing that it was in. I'm sure they recycled a few things, but a lot of it was built specifically for the new configuration. So now we're going to take a little tour of Disneyland After Dark, which is a park unto itself. It's a whole different experience at night.
Yeah.
Tomorrowland was amazing at night back then. I mean, I wasn't there then, but I was there when it still had a lot of what it had then. And I just remember the things soaring all around and how everything was lit and the rocket jets towering over you, and then they'd have like the dance bands come out from the Tomorrowland stage. Well, see? I just mentioned it and it happened. That's the Tahitian Terrace, otherwise known as Dad's attraction.
Hey.
Some famous singers. I think that was Andy Williams they just showed.
Oh, yeah, it looked like him.
Yeah. Pooh for president.
That was during the bicentennial. Well, that would have been.
Well, they started it. The first time they did it,
76,
they redid it every election year for several years. The first time they did it was 68, and then they brought it back in 72, and then they brought it back in 76. I think the last time they did it was 76. So it was like they did it 3 times. And each year it got bigger and bigger.
Funny.
Yeah, what's the name of this fireworks show here? Is this
Tragedy in the
Fantasy
Sky?
in the Sky?
Yeah, no, this is Fantasy in the Sky, the original with Tinkerbell.
I
Yeah,
can barely see her.
there she goes. Yeah, there's the rocket jets.
That's cool.
That ride freaked me out as a kid.
Oh, I
Just
couldn't
the
go
ride
on
up
that.
to the platform.
Yeah,
It made me feel like I was gonna fall out. Like Dumbo was nice and tame, but this one it leaned so much. I didn't want to go up. I stayed at the bottom. So that is the Magic of Disneyland. Thanks for joining us, everybody, and have a magical day. Bye, Ruthie. Bye, Brian.
Bye bye.